Hi everyone. As promised, I am going to make several video series of the types of depression, my experiences, and my expertise. As some of you know, I have masters in psychology and I counseled for many years, and 3 years in PhD for cognition, brain, and behavior. And so I'd like to talk to you about him because my God, there's just so many untreated depression in our country alone, United States, and not to mention in our dance industry alone. And so there are many types of depression that we need to know which type of depression you have, because if they are left untreated, it's pretty dangerous to tell you the truth. So the very first depression type that I'd like to talk to you about is called dysthymia. And some people call it now, because in the old days we used to call it dysthymia. We didn't call it anything else, except in the modern day now they call it persistent depressive disorder, which is PDD. And now this is probably the mildest of all of the depression, but don't take that and ignore that to a point that, hey, it's weak, it should be okay. That is not true at all. So let me define to you what dysthymia is, because dysthymia is basically a milder version, but a long-lasting, it's a manic one form of depression, and it's also called like it's PDD. Whenever they say PDD, it's persistent depressive disorder. Now there are two types of dysthymia, okay? Or there are two types of PDD. One is Nicolisco, okay? And the other one is Aquino proposed that dysthymia, there's two authors, Nicolisco and Aquino, proposed that there are two types. And it's basically subtypes because there is what we call anxious dysthymia and anergic dysthymia. Now, they basically describe the subset of patients with anxious dysthymia as having pronounced symptoms of low self-esteem, okay? Or undirected restlessness, you can't sleep, you can't relax. You could tell this because when they are restless, whenever they're sitting, their feet are moving, their legs are moving, or their arms are moving, they can't stay still, all right? And the other one is it's pretty much an interpersonal rejection insensitivity. Some of them are overly sensitive. But even if they're overly sensitive, okay, you're not gonna know it. They keep it to themselves. So there is that part there. So that's kind of like effed up, pretty much, you know? How bad can DPPV, can it worsen? Well, because sometimes dysthymia can be mild. Sometimes when it attacks you, it's random. But the negative part of this, amongst all other types of depression, is it's not sudden and then it goes away. It's very persistent. That's why it's called persistent. It's long term. It's chronic. Some people think that it only lasts for 2 years or more. So there's that limitation there, which I don't believe, because in my experiences of people that I counseled, they didn't even know they have one until, they get certain questions, they answer some questionnaires, they get tested, and certain psychological evaluation. So how do you determine it? Whenever you're depressed, let's say, like in my case, because I was diagnosed with dysthymia when I was 20 years old, and the doctor said I could outgrow it, and so therefore, it wasn't really treated as much. I took some depression medication, but it didn't work in my body. It didn't work in my brain because I snap at people. And so I've stopped those medication. I've forgotten it for many, many years. I was okay with it. And dancing, believe it or not, is one of the therapy that I've experienced. So, can dysthymia be diagnosed as the same as bipolar? No, because it is much more chronic. It's not as bad. It's not where you get into the bad mood and you get into the nice mood, because in order to qualify for a diagnosis of dysthymia, you have to show evidence of consistently mild depressive symptoms occurring more days, and that not over a period of at least 2 years, as they say about dysthymia. So, is it chemical imbalance? Yes. It's milder. They can have major depression at times. And is it a result of chemical imbalances in the brain? Yes or no. Sometimes it is genetic. Sometimes it's because of a trauma, either when you're a kid or even when you're an adult. Now, the question that most people ask, and this is general in depression, is can people with depressed illness, can they be happy? Okay, so let's be specific about dysthymia. Can people with dysthymia be happy? Yes and no, because I'm basing this on my experience, all right? Because it's chronic and some requires medication. When it comes to medication, and I'll talk about this later on the way you treat it, because you can either treat it without medication or you could treat it with medication. That depends, because each one of us has different body and can tolerate certain medication and whatnot. But in general, I'm so sorry, therapy, okay, is good. People around you that talks to you and treat you well and that are aware of your illness can help. So, I don't know. It could manifest in other forms of depression if it's left untreated. Okay, so now, what are the medication? Because let's talk about the medication now. Because in my experience, there are certain medication that works. There are certain medication that does not work in this form of dysthymia, which is a mild depression. I think that SSRI type of medications could work. Tricyclic antidepressants will work. The MAOIs, I don't advise it, because in the first year of my diagnosis, when I was 21, I took that and I snapped at people. So unless it works for you and that's what you've been doing, that's okay, Now, whether you're young or old, if you have this condition and it hasn't been diagnosed yet, or it has been diagnosed but you're not being treated for it because you think it's mild, it could lead you to a lot of things. Number one, motivation. The number one kryptonite for dysthymia is motivation. You could be sleeping all day and not move. You could be sitting in a couch watching TV and not even watch TV, but just for the sake of sitting in the couch. You could be unemployed for months. You can't last for a job, okay? Now, especially if something in an episode happens in your life while you are coping with this illness, it can lead to suicide. And I think the thing about suicide when you have this thought is because there's a different thing, because in a major depression, suicide would be logical for you. So when it's logical like that, and most people that committed suicide, they really, really believe that it was best for them to do that. Now, when you have dysthymia, you still have certain reasonings. You still have certain logic. You could actually talk to yourself if somebody can talk to you to prevent such thing, So I think that the best thing to do is, if it's really persistent for you, and you've been suffering low self-esteem for a long time, and you just stay at home and don't go out because you become antisocial. Yeah, some type of form of medication, Zoloft or other type of SSRIs, will help. I would advise that you start low, because it depends, because depending on how strong the medication is, start low, take half, and see how that affects you. Now, if you have a problem with it, talk to your psychiatrist. And I didn't say talk to your family doctor. Talk to a psychiatrist or talk to a psychologist. Now, the difference about a lot of people will hate me for this, okay? Because there are two schools here. You got psychologists, and then you got psychiatrists. Now, God, I'd rather not talk about this, but both have the ability to prescribe medication, but psychologists would hesitate as much as possible. That's their last resort, to prescribe medication for you. All right. So it depends on what they say, right? Now, can people with depressive disorder like this be happy? Yes, at times. Yes, and no, at times also. Because when they're happy, it's not high up there. It's moderate or low grade type of happiness. Okay. Again, I told you that it can lead to suicidal thoughts and action, and it has to be some type of medical treatment plan, or a therapy type of plan where you talk to somebody and they can help you cope with it. No. Is it considered a disability? Yeah, to most. Actually, it can manifest like other forms of depression. Because it's not cyclical, right? So if you suffer from dysthymia and unable to work, you could qualify for Social Security disability, and you get the benefits. Now, if only if you can provide documentation from your doctor, and all of the tests that the result of the test that you did. Okay. Now, here's another question. Can people with dysthymia hold a job? No. Because, if you're being treated by a psychiatrist and your doctor, there's a documentation that would show that despite seeking help for this condition, your motivation is so low that if you keep a job, it only lasts for a while and then you quit, because there's just, again, motivation is your kryptonite. You are not inspired to do anything. Yeah. So it's very important that it has to be diagnosed correctly. 60% of depressive disorder are diagnosed incorrectly. Okay? For example, let me tell you. My sister was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This happened for years and been taking medications and whatnot. One of the reasons I got into psychology is because of that. Okay? Because I could not accept that my sister was mentally ill, and I could not understand her demeanor, her behavior, because when I was just growing up, she wasn't like that, and then until she snapped, And now that I know better, now that I know different types and studied different types of depression and met with people with different types of depression and mental illness, she is not bipolar by any means. She is schizophrenic. And that explains why sometimes she hears voices. That explains why sometimes she sees people that people don't see, And it's unfortunate that she took the wrong medication, and that affected their brain a little bit, So that's one of the history of how I got into psychology in the first place. I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be in the psychiatry field because I'm not a believer of medication when it comes to mental illness. I know that there are some types of depression or mental illness that are really, really bad that you have to take medication in order for you to cope and control your behavior. That's understandable because some can lead to suicide, some can lead to murder, and this type of mental illness has to be treated with medication, of course, because this is heavy lacking of medical imbalances or just lacking certain chemicals in the brain. So. I've suffered dysthymia for many, many, many years. Sometimes it doesn't occur. It's chronic. And sometimes some people claim it only happens for 2 years and it's gone. It's not in my case. It depends on where you live, who you live with, your environment, and the people, the people that you hang out with. Now, like I told you before, dancing was and is still my therapy. It helps at times. The only problem was that, when I was single, I would go dancing every night as much as possible if I could. And the only time I could not dance on Mondays because there was no salsa on Monday, But I cope with it. Now, there is that tendency when you have this type of illness is that you have done or trying your best to find the switch, because some claims you could have a different mindset when you're having this illness, and it's like a flick of a switch, sudden your behavior change, your perspective in life change, and you begin to be as active as you can, unlike before. Now, I've tried that many times. That people talk to me about it. My loved ones talk to me about not having a motivation on why I'm not happy, and I can always tell them like, well, I'm gonna change. Let me do this. I could do this, and I can do it for a time. But again, there was no flick of a switch. I tried to look for that switch and I could not find it. Recently, I wouldn't say recent, a few months ago, I was in a hotel and I put a gun to my head. And I was convinced, before putting a gun to my head, I was convinced that there was no reason for living. Logically, in my mind, and not just logically, in my emotion, in my heart, there was no reason for living. Okay? And in the past, before that, I actually was convinced there was a reason for living, whether it's your loved one or whether the people around you, or whether you have a certain project, but you're not thinking of life is precious, or you're not thinking of it, or you're going to die at all. When it comes to certain illness like this, and I'm telling you, this is just a mild depression, right? But even with major depression, they're not thinking of dying at all. They're thinking of ending their suffering. They're thinking of ending their emotional trauma. And that's exactly what happened to me a few months ago. Now, that triggered was almost, that gun was almost triggered, And then there was one thought. One thought is, why would you let your depression defeat you? Now, a lot of people are saying, I battle with depression all the time and I do not win. Sometimes I win, sometimes I don't. And one of the things that I learned this past few months, and mind you, I haven't been taking medication, but I'm completely fine. I transform myself physically. I have a different mindset, and I have goals, little goals, and I have a vision. And one of these things is that you have, when it comes to switching, when it comes to flipping that switch, I call it flipping that switch, is because you do not battle depression. You cope with depression. You control depression. Depression will not go away. It will, but if you treat depression as if you're at war with it, you're not going to win. Okay, you treat depression with medication, you're battling depression. Okay. You treat depression as if you're avoiding people or you don't think about it. You're battling depression. You're trying to defeat it. You cannot defeat depression. But can you control it? Absolutely. Can you control? It's just like, can you control your cholesterol? Yes. Can you control your sugar in your body, your insulin? Can you control your blood pressure? Absolutely. Okay. It's the same thing with depression. Can you control it? Yes, you can control it. Can you run away from it? It's like running away from your problems. You can't run away from your problems. Running away from your emotion, with your trauma, with your PTSD, you cannot run away. You have to face it, and you have to learn how to control it, how to go around it, okay? You have to control it, okay? And so that's what I was able to do. In my mind, in my change of mindset, I was like, wait a minute. Why will I let depression defeat me where I could actually control it? I could have the upper end. And thankfully, thankfully you see me to this day, okay? And yeah, look at into medication if you need to take medication, and mind you, at this time I'm not a licensed therapist, because when I left California, my license expired, and then if I need to practice in Nevada, I need to get retested again and whatnot. So again, this is only for my opinion and my experiences. I'm not advising you to do whatnot. And of course, quote unquote, this is for information purposes only. You could always and should always consult with your psychiatrist and your doctor to take the proper medication or not, okay? But the type of medication that works is not MAOIs. It has to be SSRIs, because MMOIs, in my experience, you tend to snap at people. SSRIs are pretty mild, or if you can, talk to a psychiatrist. I think that CBP or behavioral therapy does a good thing and lasts longer and way better. You'd be surprised, guys. Don't take going to a psychologist, going to a therapist as a weakness. Don't, because even billionaires go to a therapist, go to a psychologist. Not because they're sick. They just need a sounding board, and from time to time, that's where they get their big ideas. So don't take that as a weakness, that or embarrassed by it. Now, the people around you that knows that you're depressed, or the problem with dysthymia, guys, is that it's very hard to go public about it. It's very hard to admit because of embarrassment. Like in my case, the way I treated my sister when I didn't know anything, I didn't know any better. I mean, I pretty much disowned her, and it wasn't right. Of course, it gets worse with her, with the people around her does not understand her illness. It's the same with dysthymia, because people around you, if they don't understand it, they're not gonna treat you according to your illness, or they're not they're going to be treating you like other people, where if there's something wrong with you, they don't accept it. Now, of course, it's not an excuse, because people with dysthymia can seek to help themselves, or can seek help, and it will help them in the long run. So, but all the people that are around people with depression, generally, you have to treat them differently, but at the same time, when you talk to them, you talk to them like regular people. But do not ever put them down because of certain things that normal people do that they can't do. Motivation is probably the kryptonite of all depressions, and it's unfortunate because motivations is really a disability, and not many people unmotivated. I like the people who are not motivated, and it's a chronic at that is a form of disability, and most people don't treat it that way because they're not thinking here that there's something wrong here. They're thinking that they're just lazy. That is not true at all. Okay, and it takes certain encouragement. It takes certain understanding. This means that you have to educate yourself on what the disease is, especially with you coming from a family of depression, addiction, PTSD. You gotta study these things, because if you don't, the members of your family they're gonna get worse, and not just they're gonna get worse, the people around you, because you already convinced that there's something wrong with them and that they're crazy, and then you tell people about it. Of course, they're stigmatized, and that's the problem right now. And for many, many years, I haven't shared this type of illness of mine because, for embarrassment, for shame. And when I see people and the way they treat other people with depression, I hesitate to share about it because they're not going to be able to understand. And so, but sharing this in public, and I think that when I got my degree, when I started counseling people, the problem with being a counselor is that sometimes you can't help yourself, but you can help other people better. And that's what happened to me. But helping other people better, and they got better, it kind of like healed me, But then I stopped doing counseling, and I got into dancing. I got into other forms of service. That unmotivation thing came back, and at some point, I didn't know how to cope with it. Even my loved one will tell me, "It's like, hey, are you depressed?" I was like, "Maybe." "Are you happy?" I was like, "You have never seen me happy, Yeah, you see me smile right there. Pretty strong guy when it comes to appearance, but inside, when you actually talk to people, you could determine whether they're actually going through some personal stuff or not." So, but anyway, guys, I encourage you to study more about depression, because there are so many people in our industry that are depressed and they don't even know about it. Oh, by the way, does PTSD is a form of dysthymia? Absolutely. Absolutely. And PTSD come in many forms, whether your mom died or your loved one died, or you fell in a boat, or you were in the service and something happened there, you watch people die, a breakup, a traumatic episode in your life, domestic violence, you name it, PTSD right there. And it is indeed related to dysthymia or some types of major depression. So again, it's always good to seek somebody, to seek help. And it's not a weakness to seek help, because I told you, even billionaires go to counseling and they don't even think that they're sick, So I will be, I think pretty soon, I'm going to be doing an online service for it. And the way I'm going to be doing this is, I am not going to be accepting money from you. If you want to donate, that would be it. Because again, I don't, my license expired. I don't have anything to I'm not licensed right now officially, and maybe one of these days I'll do that because I don't try to. I don't plan to do this full time. I'm willing to help anyone in the industry that at least I can relate to. I'm not gonna go outside of Nan dance community because I'm sure they're seeking help in that already. But that I notice in our industry that a lot of people need help and they don't even know about it, and they act on it and they think, and a lot of people misdiagnose them, and they may misdiagnose themselves or they're not aware of it. So it's very important we do that. Okay. I think that's pretty much it. So I think probably next video we'll talk about manic depression and bipolar disorder. There's a little slight difference between the two of them, but very similar. So again, this is about dysthymia or PDD, persistent depressive disorder. I encourage you to Google it. There's a lot of good information out there. And there's even a lot of things that I haven't covered yet, but as much as possible, when I do this video, I'd like to simplify it. I don't like to talk in medical terms because it's very, like when I tell you MAOI, SSRI, what the hell are you talking about? So if you have any questions at all, you could message me on Facebook, okay, under Rachata or Rodney Aquino, okay? Hey, ciao for now.